Every founder dreams of the fire, that spark that catches and grows into something world-changing. But what if the real story isn't about the fire at all? What if it's about recognizing when the spark is fading and having the courage to let it go? Today we're exploring one of the most painful and under-discussed aspects of entrepreneurship, the slow, quiet process of startup failure. Not the dramatic crash and burn stories you read about in the news, like, for instance, the FTX or Theranos or Builder AI, but the gradual realization that something you've poured your heart into simply isn't working. We're talking about recognizing those early warning signs, understanding why we ignore them, and learning when letting go is actually the most courageous choice you can make. This is deeply personal territory for me because I lived through this exact experience with my first startup. I basically fell out of love of doing it. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's talk about the kind of failure that doesn't explode. It just flickers out. No one tells you how slow startup failure can feel. The mythology of entrepreneurship is full of dramatic pivots, overnight successes, and spectacular crashes. But the reality for most founders is much quieter and more insidious. Failure doesn't usually explode overnight. It flickers quietly like a bug you keep swatting away, hoping it stays gone this time. For me, it started on random Tuesday, or it could just be Wednesday or Monday. It doesn't really matter. We just launched a new feature, one we genuinely believe would change the trajectory of our product. We'd spent weeks building it, testing it, perfecting it. When we finally shipped it, I was anxiously refreshing analytics, waiting for the response. Crickets, no feedback. Even haters didn't activate it. And when haters do not care to raise a ruckus, then you can basically say that nobody cares. Because if the most angry people do not care, why even bother? So there was no feedback, no uplift in engagement. Even our most loyal users barely seemed to notice. Something sank in my stomach. That sickening founder sense that something fundamental wasn't clicking anymore. But I did what most founders do. I brushed it off. I told myself, maybe I need to market it more. Maybe we just need a better messaging. Maybe we should give it more time. And it's totally fine. It's totally fine, and I hope that finally I will succeed. But it wasn't fine. There's fascinating psychological research on why we ignore warning signs in ventures we emotionally invested in. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. Our tendency to continue investing in something because we've already put so much into it, even when continuing makes no rational sense. Some people even call it a Concorde effect because, similarly to the Concorde plane that was really expensive and, to be honest, it's not very viable, people who started this project decided to continue it despite the fact that the most logical thing was to stop. Research from behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky shows that humans are loss averse. We feel the pain of loss roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of equivalent gains. This means that admitting failure hurts twice as much as success feels good, creating powerful motivation to deny problems. There's also confirmation bias at play. Once we're committed to a course of action, we selectively attend to information that confirms our choice was correct while ignoring contradictory evidence. I was doing this constantly, celebrating tiny wins while minimizing significant problems. And the fact was that the significant problems were more frequent than those tiny wins. So, in a way, I was just, being blind to the fact that it doesn't work because I was so desperate to make it work. I basically put the blinds on my eyes and said, yeah, it works. Verbagashev's research at Stanford on decision making and uncertainty shows that entrepreneurs are particularly susceptible to escalation of commitment because their identities become so intertwined with their ventures. Admitting the venture is failing feels like admitting you're failing as a person. Looking back now with the clarity that only distance provides, the warning signs were everywhere. We are building more features than we're listening to users. The classic mistake of assuming you know what people need rather than asking them. Our engagement metrics were slowly bleeding out, not dramatically enough to trigger immediate panic, but consistently enough that the trend was unmistakable if I'd been willing to see it. Our product roadmap has become completely reactionary rather than vision-led. We were chasing whatever seemed like it might work rather than executing a coherent strategy aligned with user needs. I was waking up more anxious than excited, and that should be my number one sign that I'm more anxious than excited about working on this project. My relationship with the work had shifted from energizing to draining, but I kept telling myself this was just temporary exhaustion. Like a true Polish person, I said to myself, Jana, you have to endure. Everyone endures. Life is difficult. Just fucking endure. But here's the thing. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't pleasant to my family, to my friends. I was constantly hiding the fact that, you know what, it's not so great. I kind of felt ashamed, to be honest. There were so many other feelings that I felt during that time, and all of them were, how to say it, less than positive. Every small win felt like a temporary distraction rather than genuine progress. Celebrate the new sign up or positive piece of feedback with disproportionate enthusiasm because we needed those moments to convince ourselves things were okay. But perhaps the most telling sign was that I started hiding the truth. And I mentioned that I'd hide the truth from my family, from my friends, but I also hide the truth from the people I was working with who deserved honesty about what we were facing. But I also think that they suspected that things done not so great because they could see that. So I was hiding from everyone, and most importantly, I was hiding from myself, and that costed me a lot. Because once you say something's failing out loud, it starts to feel real, and I wasn't ready to face that reality. You might reasonably ask if I could feel it in my gut that things weren't working. Why didn't I pivot or pause or ask for help? This is where it gets psychologically complex. First, my identity had become completely fused with the startup. As we discussed in episode 14, this identity fusion is incredibly common among founders. I wasn't just considering shutting down the product, I was grieving the loss of a version of myself, the founder, the builder, the dreamer who was making it happen. Closing the startup felt like admitting I wasn't who I thought I was, that the story I had been telling about myself was fundamentally wrong. Second, I didn't want to let people down. I didn't want to let down my co-founders. I didn't want to let down people with whom I worked with. I didn't want to let down early users that became part of our academy and who wanted to take a chance on our product, my inner circle who had supported and encouraged me, my friends, my family. I felt like I owed it to them to keep pushing, even when that meant abandoning my own truth and intuition. This sense of obligation is actually a form of what psychologists call impression management. The effort to control how others perceive us shows that founders often continue failing ventures longer than they should because they fear the reputational damage of admitting defeat. So, in a way, I was caring what other people think about me because I could imagine like people saying she failed her startup, so she's no good. she's not talented, what she's gonna do. But the truth is, the truth that I know right now is that it's not about my startup really, because I can always start another one like just I did recently. I can start another project. I can learn from my mistakes. It doesn't define me as a person. But this is what I currently know, not what I knew at that time. Third, I mistook sunk cost for momentum. We've already invested so much time, so many lines of code, so many we can sacrifice. Walking away felt like it would make all of that meaningless waste, all that effort. But here's the truth. I couldn't admit at the time I wasn't continuing because I believed in what we were building anymore. I was continuing because I was afraid to let go. Fear, not vision, was driving my decisions. As I said a few moments ago, I didn't realize that I could walk away. I could create another company. I can start over. I was thinking that this is my only shot at being successful. Understanding why it's so hard to let go requires looking at what's happening in our brain. When you build something, your brain creates strong neural association between the venture and your sense of identity and purpose. Dr. Gregory Burns' research on decision making shows that our brains treat ideas we've generated ourselves differently than external information. We became neurologically attached to our own creations made that impair objective evaluation. Because it's kind of like our brainchild. Some people say that a brainchild, and in a way, I think it is true. We similarly as we are, feel this sense of connection with our child, we feel the same kind of connection with our ideas. So if our child doesn't fulfill our expectations, of course we're disappointed, but we also say, but it's our child. It's perfect. Additionally, the intermittent reinforcement of entrepreneurship, occasional wins among frequent setbacks creates the same addictive neural patterns as gambling. Your brain becomes hooked on the possibility that the next feature, the next marketing push, the next pivot might be the one that changes everything. Dr. Judson Brewer's research on habit and addiction shows that the pattern activates the same rewards circuitry involved in substance dependence. You're literally addicted to the hope that things will turn around, making it neurologically difficult to accept that they won't. So yeah, I kind of say that being an entrepreneur and shipping your product is kind of like a casino. At least it gives you the sense of being in a casino that, yeah, maybe next time there will be my lucky moment. Maybe next time I win my money back. So yeah, it's very addictive. This shift towards acceptance wasn't a single dramatic moment. In my case, it was a slow return to honesty with myself. There was a conversation with a mentor who asked me point blank, "Do you still want to be doing this in a year?" The immediate tightness in my chest told me that answer before my mind could rationalize, because I knew in my bones that I hate this project, that I hate doing that. I love to do anything else. Playing piano, writing books, painting, walking, going on holidays, than doing this motherfucking, sorry for swearing, project. There was a week where I didn't touch the code or check the metrics, and I felt relieved rather than guilty. That relief was information I couldn't ignore. I was happier when I wasn't working on that project than actually doing that. There was also a journal entry where I wrote simply, "I don't want to do this anymore." Seeing those words on the page, in my own handwriting, shook me because I finally believed it. And for the first time, I let myself imagine something different. This aligns with research on therapeutic writing. Dr. James Pannebaker's studies shows that expressive writing helps people gain clarity about difficult situations by forcing conscious articulation of feelings they've been avoiding. If I could sit with my past self in that moment, slouch over my laptop, starting a chart and refuse to move in the right directions, it was, I'd say, "You're not failing. You're evolving. And there's no shame in walking away from something that no longer serves you or the people you're trying to help. Letting go isn't quitting. Sometimes it's the most courageous leadership move you can make. It takes more strength to admit something isn't working than to stubbornly push forward out of ego or fear. This perspective is supported by research on adaptive decision making. Studies show that the ability to abandon failing courses or action is actually a marker of leadership maturity and wisdom, not weakness. Dr. Carol Dweck research on growth mindset emphasizes that failure is information, not identity. The founders who ultimately succeed aren't those who never fail. They're those who can learn from failure quickly rather than denying it. In a way, failing is kind of rite of passage. And I think those really successful entrepreneurs know that. You have to go through it. You have to experience it. And the fact that you experience it and you decided, okay, I want to try it again. Maybe next time it's going to be more successful, is a marker of a successful entrepreneur. One of the most difficult questions founders face is, how do I know the difference between a genuinely hard but temporary period and all indication that the fundamental model isn't working? Here's a framework I've developed through experience and research. Ask yourself, am I tired or totally disconnected? If you're exhausted but still emotionally invested in the mission, you probably need rest and support, not closure. But if you lost the emotional thread entirely, if you feel numb or resentful rather than passionate, that's a different signal. Check your body's response. When you think about working on the project, do you feel energized or you feel dread? Your somatic response often knows through before your analytical mind accepts it, because your mind is kind of pushing that truth. No, I'm just tired. I'm just stressed. No, it's not that. Examine your decision making. Are you making proactive choices aligned with a vision or reactive moves trying to stop the bleeding? Vision led decisions feel different from panic driven ones. So ask yourself, are you making this decision because you think it's the right move and decision for your company and for your product, or you're just desperately clinging to this company and you want to save it? Consider your relationships. Are you becoming isolated and defensive, or are you opening up and seeking support? Isolation often signals that you know something's wrong but aren't ready to face it. And you don't want other people to see that you know that you need to face this problem. Look at learning velocity. Are you iterating and improving based on feedback, or doing the same thing repeatedly hoping for different results? Genuine progress requires adaptation based on new information. Now, as I'm building the self-dating app, I lead completely differently because of this painful experience. I listened earlier, I pay attention to that flicker in my gut before it becomes a 5 alarm fire. When something feels off, I investigate rather than ignore. I check in with my body, not just my metrics. How do I feel when I wake up and think about working on this? What does my nervous system tell me that my spreadsheets might miss? I trust the pauses. When I feel resistance or disconnection, I create space to understand what's happening rather than pushing through with pure willpower. I'm building a relationship with uncertainty rather than treating it as something to eliminate. Some degree of not knowing is inherent in creating anything new. The question is whether I'm embracing that uncertainty with curiosity or fighting it with denial. I share struggles earlier. I don't wait until things are crisis level to talk about challenges with advisors, team members, or my support network. Vulnerability earlier prevents catastrophe later. To be honest, I've realized that I should seek support earlier, and sharing my struggles kind of became my personal brand. And as I have recently found out, it's one of the reason why people are so magnetized towards me, because I am not afraid to share my struggles, my lessons, the fact that I failed my first startup and started to keep going. And yeah, I try not to pretend that I have everything figured out. And I've learned that I have to surround myself with people that support me, that give me good advice, that stop me from doing some crazy things. And yeah, being around people, having that kind of support, I think it makes a difference. And most importantly, I've separated my identity from the venture's outcome. I'm not my app. I'm the person building the app. If it doesn't work, I'm still fundamentally okay and capable of creating something else. My startup is not my entire life. I have many other things I can do. I have my hobbies, I have my family, friends. So it's not something that consumes me. It's just part of my identity, of course, but it's not my entire identity. There's a concept in Buddhist philosophy called attachment that's relevant here. It's not about caring deeply, it's about clinging to specific outcomes as the only acceptable possibilities. When we're attached to a venture in this way, we suffer because we're refusing to accept reality as it is. We insisting that things must be a certain way rather than responding skillfully to what's actually happening. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care or didn't try hard enough. It means you loved something enough to recognize that it had taught you everything it could and it was ready to be released. Research on organizational change and transition shows that endings are necessary for new beginnings. Without creating closure on what's not working, you don't free up the psychological and practical resources needed to pursue what might work better. In a way, life is about endings and new beginnings. And it's always like that. There's a new beginning, and at some point there's an ending. And ending of that one thing brings a new beginning. So it's kind of like a constant circle of life. If you're currently in that flickering stage with you or own venture, here's some practical guidance. Create a space for honest reflection. Set aside time away from the day-to-day operation to assess with fresh eyes. Sometimes you can't see clear when you're in the middle of the chaos. Seek outside perspectives. Talk to mentors, advisors, or fellow founders who don't have skin in the game. They can often see patterns you're too close to notice. Write it out. Journal about both what's working and what's not, without trying to solve anything. Just observe and document what's true. Do a pre-mortem. Imagine it's a year from now and the venture has clearly failed. What went wrong? This exercise can surface fears and concerns you've been suppressing. Check your motivations daily. Each morning ask, if I was starting fresh today, would I choose this path? If the answer is consistently no, that's an important data. Consider the opportunity cost. What else could you be building or doing with your time, energy, and resources? Is this venture the best use of your finite life? If you do decide to let go, be prepared for grief. Real profound grief that might surprise you with its intensity. You're not just closing a business, you're mourning a future you imagined, an identity you'd constructed, relationships that were built around the shared mission, and the version of yourself who believed the particular dream was the one. Research on grief and loss shows that entrepreneurial failure triggers the same neurological responses as other significant losses. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance apply to startup closure too. Allow yourself to grieve. Don't rush to the next things immediately. The integration period between ventures is when the most important learning happens. Give yourself permission to feel whatever comes up without judgment. Here's what I can tell you from the other side. Nothing you build is wasted. Everything you created, especially the parts that didn't work, becomes part of the wisdom you carry forward. The failure of my first startup directly informed everything good about my second one. The painful lessons about team dynamics, identity fusion, financial management, and listening to users, those all came from what didn't work. As ROI spreadsheet can measure. The return on investment from failure is wisdom, resilience, clarity, and humility. Those assets compound in ways that money never could. There's always a moment, the one where you know deep down that something isn't working. What you do with that moment is where your founder identity is actually forged. You can ignore it, numb it, or busy yourself to avoid feeling it. Or you can face it gently, truthfully, with your whole heart. Not every idea is meant to survive, but every lesson is meant to shape you into the founder you're becoming. Sometimes the startup that dies gives birth to the one that was always meant for you. My failed first venture created space for the self-dating app, a product that's more aligned with who I actually am and what I genuinely care about. Until then, if you're in that flickering stage with your own venture, trust yourself, and your intuition knows more than your spreadsheet will ever will. And whatever you decide to pivot, to push through, or to let go, make that choice from self-trust rather than fear. This is Founder Unfiltered. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.